Deep Sea Embers Chapter 376 to 380. The persistent hum of machinery reverberated through the vast, labyrinthine network of the factory's infrastructure, towering pipes acting as the arteries pulsed with the relentless rush of water, creating a mechanical symphony that filled the industrial cavern. The distinct, pungent scent of harsh chemical reagents wafted through the air, a noxious perfume so potent that it had the potential to churn one's stomach with a single whiff. The young gatekeeper, Agatha, stood rigidly beside the protective railing, her eyes narrowing as she examined the buffer pool sprawling beneath her. The opaque liquid within swirled and foamed violently, an occasional bubble breaking the surface to release a flicker of oddly colored fume. The reservoir eerily resembled the undulating digestive juices of some gargantuan, otherworldly creature. Nearby, a factory manager, cloaked in a light brown coat and bearing the clear signs of hair thinning with age, stood a step behind Agatha. Anxiety was evident on his lined face, his hand restlessly fidgeting with the button on his chest as if it was a much-needed anchor in this storm of uncertainty. The sewage originating from Oak Street in the vicinity of Cemetery No. 4 converges at this point, the manager articulated carefully, his eyes flickering between the buffer pool and the gatekeeper's stoic profile. Following your orders, we immediately severed the pipe connections in the surrounding area and meticulously examined the alarm systems of each buffer pool. We found no indications of supernatural contamination. Agatha absorbed his report in silence before posing her first question abruptly, "What's the standard procedure for sewage treatment here?" Her query seemed to catch the manager off guard, but he recovered swiftly, responding, "The treatment commences with high-pressure steam purification to eliminate any potential contamination. As you're aware, this wastewater, having interacted with humans and traveled through shadowy, winding pipelines, often becomes a host to certain undesirables. Following the steam purification is the process of sedimentation and filtration. What you observe beneath us is the sedimentation pool. A second steam purification follows this stage. Subsequently, a portion of the treated water is recirculated into the factory's system, while the remaining part is released into the sea." As he finished his explanation, Agatha nodded subtly, then inquired again, "What is the approximate transit time for sewage from North Oak Street to this location?" "Depending on specific circumstances, it generally does not exceed 2 hours, the manager stated. "And the duration of sewage retention here?" "Water in the sedimentation pool is replaced every 72 hours, the manager explained, his anxiety escalating as he wiped the sweat from his furrowed brow. "Our purification and inspection procedures follow strict guidelines and can't be shortened below this time period." Nodding again, Agatha appeared lost in thought, her mind processing the information and aligning it with the counterfeit incident timeline at the residential building and the sewage treatment schedule. She mused aloud, "So, if the entity managed to escape via the sewage system, it should still be contained here." The manager, now visibly unsettled, couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "Gatekeeper," he implored, mopping his gleaming forehead, what exactly transpired? Is there some form of contamination propagating through our sewage network? "We can't entirely dismiss that possibility," Agatha responded, briefly casting a sidelong glance at the visibly shaken manager before turning her attention towards the assembly of guards, garbed in uniform black attire. They were methodically collecting samples and inspecting various equipment throughout the facility. "However, based on our tests thus far, the conditions here seem to be within normal parameters." "Yes," the manager squeezed out a smile, the tension in his features not entirely masked. "Each corner of this place is monitored by an elaborate alarm system, purpose-built to detect any traces of sacrilegious contamination. Moreover, this treatment center houses 3 dedicated resident priests, who regularly perform tests on the water samples." "Resident priests?" Agatha interjected, her tone indicating that she'd recalled something crucial. She pivoted to face the manager. "Did you say there were 3 resident priests here?" "3, yes, 3, the manager stuttered, seemingly unnerved by Agatha's sudden change in demeanor. Is there an issue?" "There should only be 2 priests assigned here. The number of resident priests at all levels of municipal facilities is meticulously regulated." "Where did this 3rd priest originate from?" The manager's visage hardened instantaneously, a sheen of cold sweat breaking across his forehead as a looming sense of dread gripped those eyes. Observing his reaction, Agatha swiftly lifted her staff and placed it on his shoulder. A reassuring force suppressed the waves of fear, threatening to overwhelm his consciousness. She commanded in a stern voice, "Listen, it's crucial that you maintain your composure. Your next task is to gather all the resident priests and bring them here. Inform them that the gatekeeper requires further insights into the situation. Your demeanor should not betray any signs of distress, do you understand?" The manager's agitation seemed to have abated, albeit he remained slightly nervous. He nodded hurriedly, "Yes, I comprehend, I'll proceed immediately." Agatha gave him an approving nod and retracted her staff. Just as he was about to retreat, she seemed to recall something of importance. "Hold on a moment, not only the resident priests. I want everyone present here." The manager swiveled around in surprise. "Everyone. Everyone," Agatha reiterated, her tone laden with a hint of unease. She further questioned, "Since yesterday, has anyone departed from this treatment center?" "No." The manager replied promptly. "The order arrived just 15 minutes prior to the shift change. All the personnel on duty remained stationed here." "Excellent. Gather all of them here. Explain it as a mandatory inspection. Keep the atmosphere light, and avoid causing any suspicion. Now, proceed." The manager, thinning hair slightly askew, nodded and swiftly moved away, visibly attempting to regain his composure. Agatha stood rigid beside the buffer pool, her gaze fixed on his retreating silhouette until it disappeared behind a distant door. Only then did she signal to the nearby guardians, who had already detected the developing tension. The guardians, cloaked in their black attire, immediately sprang into action. They began to meticulously arrange concealed runes around the open ground adjacent to the buffer pool, interspersing the intricate network of pipes and intersections with a mix of essential oils and crushed incense powder. Once their preparatory work was complete, they took up strategic positions around the site, disguising their vigilance under the guise of continued facility checks. As the guards dispersed to their respective tasks, Agatha hoisted her staff aloft and methodically traced an equilateral triangle in the space around her, each side extending roughly 2 meters in length. She positioned herself in the center of this geometric figure, leaning against her staff with both hands, the embodiment of tranquil anticipation. A rhythmic patter of footfall began to resonate from the direction of the primary entry point. The manager made his re-entry into the treatment facility, his return to the vicinity of the buffer pool marked by a trail of a diverse group. Amongst the throng were 3 conspicuous figures, ordained members of the Death Church. They were garbed in church robes and bore sacred insignia, a testament to their religious affiliation. Under the manager's direction, about a dozen employees of the treatment center assembled before Agatha. They formed a loose queue, nervously extending greetings towards the gatekeeper that stood before them. The trio of resident priests veered away from the rank and file, courteously bowing to Agatha in accordance with the internal etiquette and hierarchical norms of the Church of Death. Agatha instructed the trio of priests to disperse, her gaze then embarked on a slow yet meticulous scan of the sea of faces before her. She sensed an anomaly. Although she failed to observe any overtly suspicious expressions or erratic movements, and despite the absence of any perceptual oddities, the divine blessing of Bartok had validated the existence of an inconsistency to Agatha. It was concealed within the rhythmic cadence of their breaths, the pulsating throb of their heartbeats, and even in the casting of their shadows upon the ground. Agatha blinked, mentally reassessing her surroundings to ensure her observations were accurate, and then the realization dawned on her. Indeed, cognitive interference existed, one that persisted even in her presence, the formidable gatekeeper of Frost. Was this a manifestation of bold defiance? Or was it a consequence of ignorance towards the gatekeeper's formidable powers? Or perhaps, was this cognitive interference simply uncontrollable? Agatha's gaze gradually shifted, ultimately landing on the triad of priests. Temporarily excluding the dozen or so workers from her speculation, one among these 3 priests was undeniably an impostor, but who could it be? Utter the name of Bartok, Agatha instructed in a low, steady voice. May the Lord of Death keep vigil over us, illuminating the veil of deceit in this ephemeral world. In the name of the Lord of Death, Bartok, one priest initiated without hesitation, may he remain our sentinel. The remaining 2 priests promptly followed suit. In the name of the Lord of Death, Bartok. The triad of voices echoed in a sequential chorus, eliciting a frown from Agatha. The ability to pronounce the name of the deity confirmed that they were neither sham constructs molded from mud nor adherents of a discordant faith. If they were, the intense dichotomy of faith would be sufficient to shred their sanity to fragments. Yet how could this be? Could all three priests be authentic? Agatha's mind was a whirlwind of conjecture, yet she maintained an outward visage of serenity. Nodding to the triad of men, she declared, "Next, I shall conduct some essential examinations. Your cooperation is appreciated." Simultaneously, her hand gravitated towards her left eye. The eyeball, astonishingly lively, immediately disembarked from its cavity, landing unerringly in her outstretched palm. Holding this detached eyeball, Agatha directed its gaze at the trio of priests arrayed before her. The image of the first priest materialized in her field of vision, an emaciated elder garbed in a linen robe, a chain as dark as obsidian protruding from the region beneath his ribcage. A brooding hound, chained at the end, tilted its head towards her, its maw rapidly coalescing into an abomination of polluted energy. Heretic. To think he would brazenly stand here. Agatha's expression subtly shifted, but she was prepared. The moment the somber hound flung open its cavernous jaws, she had already deftly sidestepped, and the staff in her right hand was poised, its tip ablaze with pallid flames. However, just as she was about to incinerate the heretic, another cryptic incantation permeated the air from an adjacent location. The eyeball clutched in Agatha's left hand jolted. The next instant, she was presented with the vision of a straw-haired young man with a pronounced nose, his hands extended towards her. A nebulous jellyfish, seemingly conjured from a miasma, hovered behind him. That was the second priest. A bout of vertigo struck her, and as Agatha struggled to regain her equilibrium, a third incantation resounded. A woman with a ghastly pallor at the fringe of her vision was extending her hand in her direction. A feline entity, assembled from skeletal fragments and black miasma, was hunched next to the woman. That was the third priest. All the priests were impostors, and the chaos of combat filled the air from all directions. The moment the trio of heretical acolytes initiated their assault, the surrounding guardians sprang into action, attempting to intervene. However, they too encountered formidable adversaries of their own. The approximate dozen employees that had accompanied the manager had erupted into violent conflict with the nearby guardians. In Agatha's peripheral vision, she observed the bodies of the employees rupture upon impact, spewing a sludge-like substance with the consistency of viscous mud. The manager, his hairline receding, was the lone figure who managed to dart towards a proximate pipe, emitting strident screams of sheer terror. In the entirety of the wastewater treatment center, there existed but a single, human. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The world unveiled its complexities before her in what felt like the mere flutter of an eyelash. A trio of blasphemous believers, cleverly disguised as devout individuals of the Death Church, sprung their unexpected offensive. The local guards, notable in their signature obsidian armor, were quickly roused into action, prepared to counterstrike the sudden threats. Concurrently, the wastewater treatment facility employees, a group roughly numbering in the dozens, found themselves embroiled in a conflict with these guardians. An intricate dance of strife and disorder ignited almost without warning, enveloping the area in chaos. An alarming truth emerged from the turmoil: the entire team operating the wastewater treatment facility had been gradually replaced. The infiltration was absolute, the facility was entirely under enemy control. This revelation accounted for the lack of any action against pollution in the sedimentation tanks and the pipes. The missing elements from the sewer system hadn't just inexplicably disappeared. Instead, they had set up a fortified base right under the unsuspecting gaze of city officials and the Death Church itself. Still, a multitude of questions buzzed around. How was it possible for these sacrilegious followers of the Nether Lord to daringly invoke the name of the God of Death? How had these pretenders, masquerading as facility workers, slipped past her sharp vigilance? What had become of the genuine employees? In light of all these questions, the situation's urgency gave Agatha little room to delve into these puzzling mysteries or piece together any coherent answers. The potent, corrosive presence of a dark hound swelled and came rushing towards her, while a dark energy sphere barely missed grazing her hair, shooting past to puncture a pillar standing near the sedimentation tank. The mental assault continuously unleashed by the demon jellyfish severely hampered her thought processes and movements. Simultaneously, a haunted woman who shared a unique bond with a feline-shaped demon raised her hand from afar for a spell. Agatha's immediate surroundings were beset by intersecting bloodstains. Even the slightest contact of her robe with these bloody insignia resulted in immediate disintegration to dust. It was a skillfully designed and well-coordinated ambush. Now, the puzzle pieces had started to fall into place, explaining why these deviants had boldly gathered under the guise of a routine inspection. Could it be that they were audacious enough to challenge the gatekeeper of the Death Church directly? How naive, Agatha murmured, lightly tapping her staff on the floor. The sound was unassuming, but it resonated like a thunderclap, setting off spectral waves that emanated from the base of her staff in all directions. Almost immediately, an eerie silence engulfed everything in its vicinity as the area around the sedimentation tank was shrouded in shadow. Everything in sight was painted in stark shades of gray and black, freezing allies and foes alike within the room while a faint luminescence seeped through distant doors, windows, and fresh cracks in the ceiling. In the spectral, otherworldly domain, Agatha calmly surveyed her environment through the unique eye embedded in the palm of her left hand. With an unnerving, laser-like focus, she examined the true forms of the deviant heretics and the parasitic demons obediently following their directives. Once satisfied that no concealed enemies lurked in the shadows, Agatha raised her staff and subtly directed the guardians back to the concrete realm of reality with a gentle swing through the air. Feast, Agatha softly commanded in a voice that was little more than a whisper. In response to her command, the inhabitants of the spirit realm sprung to life. The shadows, dwelling in this world's hidden corners and recesses, responded obediently to the call of the Death Church's gatekeeper. In a mere fraction of a second, an immeasurable swarm of shadows, both light and dense, burst forth from all around the sedimentation pond, the adjoining walls, the complex network of pipes, and even from the dauntingly high ceiling. They congregated as if they were a stirred-up crowd or a herd of stampeding beasts, sliding along all surfaces and swiftly converging upon the enemies within Agatha's direct line of sight. Every visible surface was teeming with writhing, undulating shadows. The sight was eerie enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. However, Agatha merely observed this unsettling spectacle with a calm, unperturbed demeanor. Her right eye was wide open, entirely void of any emotional disturbance. Meanwhile, her left eye remained tightly shut as the ocular orb in her left hand spun continuously, keeping a vigilant watch on every slight movement around her. The first to be swallowed by the writhing shadows were the counterfeit creatures. The shadows swiftly engulfed them, silent yet rapid, eradicating and dissolving them until no trace remained. The very next instant, these menacing shadows surged towards the three annihilators and their respective parasitic familiars. As the demons became aware of the impending threat, a strange crackling noise began to resonate from their forms and the chains that bound them. Their demonic flames flickered wildly, and the bodies of the annihilators started to show an uncanny, rhythmic tremor. In this ethereal realm where everything else was frozen in stillness, they somehow managed to revive their mobility. The young man, who shared a symbiotic bond with the demonic jellyfish, was the first to regain his ability to move. He struggled free from the restrictions of the spirit realm and instinctively cast his gaze in Agatha's direction. Almost simultaneously, the aged, gaunt man, who was bound in a symbiotic pact with the Dark Hound, also recaptured his ability to move. Seeing his comrade's actions, he immediately cried out in warning, "Don't lock eyes with the gatekeeper." However, his warning was in vain. The young cultist's gaze was already steadfastly fixated on the triangular area where Agatha was positioned. Agatha raised her left hand, elevating her ocular orb as if deliberately showcasing it to the young cultist. The heretic found himself transfixed, his gaze irresistibly pulled towards the eyeball nestled in Agatha's hand. His stare was spellbound, almost entranced, as if his very being was magnetically drawn towards the unusual spectacle. Gradually, a serene smile began to adorn his countenance. It was as if, in that singular, momentous instant, he had unlocked the deep-seated truths of life and death, uncovering the meaning and answers he had long sought in his existence within this singular revelation. "Ah, what a magnificent sight," he softly murmured to himself. Adorned with a calm smile, he slowly surrendered to the encroaching sea of shadows. He and his demonic companion were swiftly torn apart by the relentless tidal wave of shadows. However, as this heretic was taken by the shadows, a chilling, unnatural scream echoed nearby. A surge of wind pressure rapidly approached from the right. Displaying impressive agility, Agatha sidestepped just as an invisible blade whizzed past her forehead. She swiftly turned her head to locate the origin of the assault. The pallid woman, who shared a symbiotic relationship with the feline-shaped demon, unleashed a guttural shriek towards Agatha. Her mouth distorted into a grotesque, alien-like orifice, compacting her blasphemous curse into a concentrated, sonic assault. Her next blade was already swiftly taking shape. Disregarding the looming presence of the Dark Hound and the frail, elderly man behind her, Agatha redirected her staff towards the pallid woman, whose form had begun to reveal demonic mutations. Simultaneously, she lifted her left hand, brandishing her ocular orb once again. The pallid woman instinctively evaded the gaze of the eye in Agatha's hand, but her evasion was met with the resounding crack of a gunshot. A brilliant flame erupted from the end of Agatha's staff, and a large-caliber silver bullet splattered the woman's head, which had grotesquely mutated beyond recognition. In the next moment, as the decapitated body of the heretic toppled and was consumed by the shadows, a wave of corrosive breath targeted Agatha's back. Black flames and smoke billowed from the point of impact, only to be rapidly dispersed in the ensuing moment. Nevertheless, Agatha's black coat remained impeccably intact, showing no signs of damage. She gradually turned her gaze, focusing on the final cultist still standing, the emaciated old man wide with a potent cocktail of shock and terror. I was under the impression that you had thoroughly researched and planned before daring to set this trap, Agatha stated in a composed manner, her eyes studying her final opponent. But judging from your reaction, that doesn't seem to be the case. Could it be that you three were merely sacrificial lambs, recklessly thrown into the chaos as bait? The eyes of the remaining cultist widened even further, his terror now intermingled with confusion. Agatha astutely observed this shift in his expression. Is this what you were looking for? The young gatekeeper inquired with unnerving tranquility. She abruptly opened her mouth the next instant, and a cloud of dense, corrosively potent shadow breath formed instantaneously before her. Then, emulating the same trajectory and velocity it had struck her, the shadow breath was launched back towards the Dark Hound beside the skeletal old man. Realizing the imminent threat, the Dark Hound tried to evade with lightning-like speed. However, as if guided by its own sentient will, the returning corrosive breath adjusted its course mid-flight. It homed in unerringly on the skull of the Dark Hound, and after a brief moment of stillness, the demon, now a mere pile of disjointed bones, shattered into fragments on the spot. The skeletal cultist, bound symbiotically with the demon, let out a terrifying scream. Though he hadn't been directly hit, he immediately collapsed onto the ground in unbearable pain, rendered entirely incapacitated. Like a surging tidal wave, the shadows readied themselves to swallow him in a matter of seconds, keen to continue their voracious feast. Spare this one for me, Agatha's voice echoed at that moment, accentuated by the resonant thud of her staff striking the ground. Stand down. The shadows around them started to quiver uneasily. Waves of hostility and eerie, indistinct whispers resounded like a storm, echoing throughout the entire area. Some shadows even began to inch towards Agatha. However, Agatha's demeanor remained resolute. She simply lifted her staff and slammed it forcefully onto the ground, igniting a thunderous roar that reverberated throughout the entire vicinity. Begone. After a brief moment of stillness and silence, all the shadows receded as swiftly as an ebbing tide. The otherworldly realm where spirits hold dominion, menacing groupings of shadow began their reluctant retreat, gradually fading into non-existence. The transition within the spiritual world was profound, marked by a haunting tranquility that seemed to echo in the void. Agatha, a custodian of this mystical orb, gently lifted her left hand, her gaze fixed silently on the incapacitated heretic who had collapsed at the boundary of the sacred geometric symbol, the triangle. The heretic presented a picture of agony and desolation, and his body writhed in severe pain on the harsh, unsympathetic terrain. The black chains, emblems of his sinister commitment, had been violently broken. The shattered remnants of these chains sent forth plumes of smoke, slowly dissolving into a powder-like residue, an amulet of their past potency and binding power. The demise of his tethered demonic canine companion signaled the heretic's impending death. His life force was rapidly depleting, yet he was not entirely spent, still possessing the ability to respond to some pivotal questions. Agatha bore no illusions about this obstinate heretic's willingness to cooperate, yet she approached him at a leisurely pace, stopping at the periphery of the mystical triangle. She peered down, her penetrating gaze focused on the hapless devotee of the darkness. "I find it quite astonishing," she started, her voice methodical and unvarying, resonating in the ethereal environment with a grave-like echo capable of eroding even the most formidable mental defenses. "You infiltrated an important establishment and assumed control, all while under the watchful eyes of the Death Church. Moreover, you replaced all the priests. How did you accomplish such a feat?" On the brink of death, the heretic made an effort to lift his head, managing only a derisive smirk. His emaciated face showed no trace of fear. "Guess." Agatha, unfazed by his rudeness, continued, "Is your secret headquarter concealed within frost?" The cultist's answer came in the form of a weak, contemptuous laugh. Laboriously, he adjusted his position, lying back flat on the starkly white terrain, his defiant gaze locked with Agatha's probing eyes. "Don't trouble yourself, even if it's in frost, you'll never find it. By the time you chance upon our sanctuary, our triumph will be a foregone conclusion, naive priestess." Agatha's face remained expressionless. With no discernible emotion, she lifted her staff, aiming its end at the cultist's chest. "What is your grand strategy? To infect the city-state with your so-called elements? Or maybe you aspire to replace the living populace with your volatile counterfeits? How does the power concealed in the deep sea contribute to this? Is it connected to the Abyss project?" A spectral blaze ignited at the tip of her staff, radiating an eerie glow. This flame possessed a power that could scorch both the tangible form and the intangible spirit, imposing a degree of suffering that was simply intolerable. The cultist contorted under the strain, yet his dedication to his dark cause did not waver. His teeth were set on edge, his stare unflinchingly fixed on the imposing figure of the gatekeeper. His unsettling laughter, rasped out through his gritted teeth, struck a chilling chord. "Ha, ha, the prophecy is nearing its completion, no one can escape it." For the first time, a hint of displeasure marred Agatha's stoic countenance. She gradually raised her arm, her staff serving as a conduit to lift the heretic into the air. The phantasmal flames engulfed his form, a body long warped due to its unholy symbiosis with the demonic hound. He hovered in midair, reminiscent of a ragged fabric flag fluttering amidst the ghostly inferno. Agatha's voice echoed, bearing a bone-chilling coldness that matched the stark, desolate reverberations of a crypt. "I pose one final inquiry. How do you blasphemers dare to utter the name of our death deity?" Amidst the spectral flames, the skeletal silhouette of the cultist emerged, a slow, self-satisfied grin gradually spreading across his features. His pleasure was so intense that the pain from his ongoing immolation seemed to diminish by half, particularly at the sight of the church's gatekeeper being momentarily confounded by his audacious statement. Indeed, the Lord of the Underworld reveals hidden realities. All world religions blur into a single indistinct entity. We, who have been enlightened, have transcended such petty differences. Dear foolish gatekeeper, do you truly believe there's a difference between your God and our Lord? Agatha's visage underwent a swift transformation in response to this brazen proclamation. The offender before her had dared to draw a parallel between the Nether Lord and the God of Death. His irreverence ignited a rage within her. Yet, the heretic allowed himself a final, self-satisfied grin within the conflagration consuming him, affording her no chance to extend her interrogation. He breathed his last, leaving behind only his rapidly deteriorating remains. Nothing but the delirious ramblings of a madman, devoid of coherence and rationality. Agatha's expression was an ominous storm as she lowered her staff. Her anger still bit keenly, but she made sure that these emotional surges did not muddy her discernment. In fact, once she successfully suppressed her visceral reactions, she instantly initiated her mental cogs. Discarding the audacity of the heretic's ultimate statement, which dared to equate the Nether Lord with the God of Death, the stubborn cultist had unwittingly revealed a substantial amount of information for her to dissect and examine. Indeed, the cultists did harbor a stronghold within Frost, a location they referred to as a sanctuary, an implication of its significance as a ritualistic ground. This insight was in sync with the existing information. Their sanctuary was cleverly hidden, making it a formidable challenge to locate. Yet, the heretic had hinted that their success was tied to the unearthing of the sanctuary. This suggested that the mode of concealment could be intrinsically connected to the progression of their ritual. The closer the ritual came to completion, the more discernible the sanctuary's whereabouts became. Could this be a consequence of the ritual inadvertently leaking some form of aura? Or was the unveiling of the sanctuary's location an integral aspect of accomplishing the ritual? Furthermore, the heretic had hinted at something they termed the promised arrival. This might coincide with their belief system's climactic prophecy that the power of the Nether Lord would overtake the physical world, and the spiritual deep sea, typically concealed deep within the world, would transform into the new reality. The cult's fervent adherents, the Annihilators, invariably envisioned the unfathomable abyss of the sea as their paradise. This much was indisputable. However, the specifics of this metamorphosis remained ambiguous. Would simply introducing primordial elements into the city-state suffice? Clearly, this alone was inadequate. These counterfeit elements could hardly maintain their stability over a long duration, much less contaminating an entire city-state. Unless, what if these zealous annihilators had unearthed a technique to sustain the stability of these counterfeits over an extended period? They could conceivably create an environment conducive to this, or perhaps, they could manipulate frost itself to serve as such an environment. Agatha's eyebrows drew together as she hastily concluded her line of reasoning and surveyed her environment. She was still in the spiritual realm, a place bathed in an otherworldly radiance that streamed from cracks in the ceiling, painting everything with a spectral glow. Subtle noises could be heard from all around. The persistent shadows of the spirit realm were becoming restless again. Evidently, a feast could not keep them appeased for long. The youthful gatekeeper shook her head, raised her left hand, and carefully repositioned her eyeball into its socket. Instantly, the far-off rustlings halted, the dim shadows and the monochrome landscape regained their color, and the familiar scent of the material world filled her senses. Agatha exhaled a soft sigh and reached into her garments to retrieve some eye drops, but abruptly, her motion stilled. The atmosphere was ominously silent, entirely devoid of any human presence. Agatha swept her gaze around the area, unable to locate the black-clad guardians she had arrived with, nor could she pinpoint the whereabouts of the supervisor of the sewage treatment facility who had earlier fled in terror. Even more perplexing, she couldn't find any trace of the ashes of the three heretics and the numerous counterfeits. Xmas. In theory, after vanquishing those heretics and counterfeits within the spirit realm, their remains should have materialized in the physical world concurrently. The silence was eerie and unsettling. She could not sense the presence of any living beings in the vicinity. Agatha's brows knitted together tightly. She moistened her eyes, relieving their dryness while cautiously surveying her surroundings, then slowly headed towards the nearby exit. There, she found the rusted metal gate slightly ajar, indicating a hurried departure. Following a harsh metallic screech, she pushed open the metal gate to find a corridor devoid of warmth despite the burning gas lamps to the sides. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythmic sound of her staff and heels striking the floor echoed sharply and hollowly in the corridor as Agatha steadily advanced. The entire sewage treatment center was desolate, utterly devoid of any human presence. However, there were also no adversaries in sight. Unhindered, she moved through the factory area and emerged into an open space outside the facility. The sky above was a suffocating, heavy sheet of dark, tumultuous clouds that obscured the city-state. Only a few feeble, lifeless rays of light managed to filter through the cloud cover, providing a dim hint of daylight. All visible structures were submerged under this gloomy expanse, emanating a frigid, deathly, spectral aura. Agatha vividly remembered that when she had first arrived at the sewage treatment center, the day outside was brilliantly sunny, the sun was proudly perched high in the sky, and the city-state was beautifully unblemished by a single cloud. The sun. A minuscule seed of doubt began to sprout in Agatha's mind, rapidly evolving into a pronounced sense of cognitive dissonance. She abruptly stumbled upon a realization. Driven by it, she again raised her gaze to scrutinize the sky overhead. The sky was solely lit by an unidentifiable, chaotic light, devoid of any celestial body that could be recognized as the sun. Agatha strained to recollect the appearance of the sun, the concept of the sun. She found herself unable to recall, as if a thick fog had settled over her understanding, obscuring her memories of the sun. However, one detail remained glaringly distinct. There was meant to be a celestial body in this world, dubbed the sun, which ordinarily dwelled in the sky, emitting light and warmth to illuminate all existence. Cognitive disruption, influencing even a gatekeeper, its intensity is impressive, encapsulating the entire environment, Agatha murmured to herself. After an initial moment of disbelief, she quickly gathered her composure and started to scrutinize her surroundings with renewed focus. I am in a different realm. Agatha found herself navigating the eerily deserted city streets that she once knew like the back of her hand. The once bustling urban vistas, which were typically brimming over with the vitality of life, had now fallen into a deeply unsettling silence, their vibrancy replaced by a disconcerting, deathly calm. She couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that unseen eyes were observing her from within the towering structure's hidden depths, flanking her from behind the firmly shut windows and locked doors. It felt as if she were being stealthily pursued from every concealed nook and cranny. She was on a relentless quest to find a way out of this chilling, otherworldly realm or, perhaps, to escape from the sinister being who had trapped her within its confines. Every sight or item that seemed out of place, even in the slightest, could potentially act as a gateway, a subtle fold between her actual reality and this uncanny, parallel dimension. However, up to this point, she had been unable to locate any such terror in the fabric of this chilling version of her home city. The only certainty she could cling to in this bewildering situation was that she had somehow made contact with the ever-present shadow that had perpetually loomed over her city. Whether this contact had been a fortuitous accident or a deliberate trap set by a hidden force, she had successfully crossed the barrier that had always clouded her perception. This place, uncannily similar to Frost, was surely the source of the odd string of events that had disrupted the city's peace in the recent past. In the distance, the creaking sound of a carriage wheel rolling over the cobblestone road reached her ears, mingling with the soft chimes of a bell tolling and the eerie creaks of doors swinging open and shut. When Agatha turned her attention to the origin of these noises, she was greeted by an empty street. However, farther off, she observed shadowy figures that hinted at carriages shooting past intersections and vague outlines that might have been pedestrians hurrying along their paths. There were indeed inhabitants in this city, but, for the most part, she could only catch fleeting glimpses of distant, ghost-like apparitions. Similarly, she could pick up the muffled sounds of conversations but often could not determine their source. The entire setting had the feel of a surreal, twisted dream. As Agatha's shadowy form blended with the darkness at yet another intersection, she stopped in her tracks. She came to the realization that aimlessly wandering was a mere waste of her precious energy and time. What she needed to do was to scrutinize her surroundings with a keen view. She closed her eyes, allowing her senses to broaden and absorb the environment enveloping her, painstakingly dissecting the various stimuli from her surroundings, the complex orchestra of sounds, the distinct aroma that marked the city, the direction of the wind, and most importantly, the life-giving warmth that emanated from living beings. Following a brief moment of stillness, Agatha decisively spun on her heel and ventured in a particular direction. Her eyes remained closed, yet she navigated around the hindrances in her path with an accuracy that suggested clear vision. She skillfully traversed narrow alleyways, bustling crossroads, and meandering lanes. Her journey spanned what felt like an endless duration until she eventually halted in front of a structure tucked away in the corner of a street. When Agatha finally unveiled her eyes, she discovered she was standing in front of a charming, lively restaurant. The place was washed in the warm glow of inviting light, and from its heart flowed a stream of animated chatter. These sounds were palpable, a soothing affirmation of the presence of living entities within the building. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Agatha extended her hand and gently pushed open the door of the restaurant. With her entrance, the door set off a high-pitched jingle from a bell announcing her arrival. The restaurant's interior spread out before Agatha's gaze, momentarily leaving her disoriented and questioning if she had somehow managed to slip back from the eerie parallel reality into the familiar world she yearned for. The restaurant was radiant with light, teeming with customers and bustling with busy staff members. A bartender could be spotted rushing about behind the counter. The audible clinking of cutlery against dishes filled the air, punctuated by the gentle hum of conversations touching upon mundane topics like the weather, work affairs, and commodity prices. The earlier ominous, ghostly silence of the outdoor streets seemed to have been swept away by this lively tableau of normal existence. Yet, Agatha soon noticed the stark anomaly of the scene. Despite the diners appearing to relish their meals, their plates and cups were disturbingly void. The bartender, who seemed engaged behind the counter, was simply pacing in place, relentlessly cleaning the same glass in his possession in an endless loop. Each individual resembled a marionette, accurately programmed to imitate the daily tasks of life, their simulation so perfect it could easily fool a casual observer. A frown etched lines into Agatha's forehead. Having deciphered the peculiar reality, the ambiance within the restaurant now felt even more disquieting than the desolate streets she had left behind. However, she didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped further into the heart of the restaurant. The weirder the place, the stronger the clue that she was moving in the correct direction. With Agatha's inaugural step into the restaurant, the animated chatter abruptly came to a halt with all the patrons, their faces frozen mid-sentence, hands still in the act of dining. Once the voices had been snuffed out in the wide open space, the only remaining sound was the monotonous tinkling of dishes and cutlery clashing in the ensuing silence. As Agatha boldly took a second step forward, even the mechanical clattering of dishes and cutlery ceased abruptly. Every individual present in the restaurant froze in their actions, their bodies rendered motionless beside their square tables as if a master controller had instantly switched off their life force. Upon her third step, the restaurant's patrons methodically lowered their utensils. Rising from their seats akin to an assembly of the undead, they rotated their heads, focusing their numerous vacant gazes on her in eerie unison. Subsequently, Agatha swept her gaze over to the counter situated in front of her. The bartender, who had been perpetually engaged in cleaning the same cup, finally discontinued his repetitive motion. However, unlike the zombie-like, expressionless customers surrounding him, the bartender slowly lifted his head, a soft smile adorning his face as his eyes met Agatha's gaze. His smile carried a subtle warmth bordering on an almost friendly demeanor. "Welcome, Miss Gatekeeper," greeted the youthful man acting as the bartender. Boasting neat, cropped blonde hair, he was undeniably attractive, attired in a flawless white shirt paired with a stylish black jacket. His manner was polite as he addressed Agatha, exuding the aura of a professionally trained host attending to a distinguished guest. "We are honored by your visit. What do you think of our delightful city?" "It seems like you're the catalyst behind all this," Agatha retorted, maintaining a cool composure as she scrutinized the blonde bartender standing before her. "Unearthing you turned out to be easier than I expected. Or perhaps not as uncomplicated as you believe," the blonde youth responded with a chuckle. "What would you like? Maybe some poisonous muddy water? Bread made from soil? Or an empty bowl? We have an abundance here." Choosing to disregard his sarcastic tone, Agatha lifted her staff, swinging it through the air with authority. In an almost immediate reaction, the young man positioned behind the counter was enveloped by swirling layers of pale, spectral flames that materialized seemingly out of nowhere. Deploying her gatekeeper's cremation ability, she incinerated his counterfeit exterior to cinders within mere moments, leaving behind only ash that pirouetted in the air before resting on the counter. However, Agatha's facial expression remained undisturbed. Even before she invoked the flames, she had sensed the void of life force within the young man. A peculiar, squishy noise attracted her attention from a neighboring table. Agatha shifted her gaze to see a diner standing stiffly by a table, their body beginning to twitch uncontrollably. The next instant, the figure's form started to melt like a wax figure, a dark, viscous substance frothing and reconfiguring on their exterior. Within moments, the individual had morphed into an identical replica of the young blonde man, donned in the same white shirt and black jacket. "That's quite a discourteous welcome," the reborn young man lamented, nonchalantly dusting off his attire with a pretense of helplessness as his eyes met Agatha's. "Miss Gatekeeper, surely you don't believe that's the last of me? Do you really think I'd recklessly expose my true form in such a dangerous setting?" "I'm aware you're not physically present," Agatha shot back, her face a stoic visage, "but at least it might grant me a brief respite from your chatter." Fine, fine, it seems you're not in the mood for idle small talk, quite the serious woman you are." By comparison, Professor Melson's final spectacle was far more entertaining. The young man shrugged nonchalantly, "But I suppose that's all right. As long as you remain here passively for a while, I don't mind hosting a rather lackluster captive. Upon hearing the name, Professor Melson, Agatha's typically placid expression showed a hint of alteration. She was reminded of the enigmatic disappearance of Dagger Island and the chain of explosions that had jolted the island just prior to its vanishing. Most importantly, she registered the implications carried within his latest comments. What are you insinuating with your recent words? Agatha demanded, her voice icy as a chilling winter breeze directed at the blonde impostor before her. Nothing significant, merely proposing that you stay here as our guest for a duration, the young man replied, his laughter echoing around with an uncanny cheerfulness. You needn't worry about what unfolds above. Soon enough, another version of you will step into your role there. She will rally the Guardians, just as you would have, and then prepare a report detailing the real state of affairs at the wastewater treatment facility. Rest easy, she will document every detail meticulously, including the pollution at the core and the changeover in personnel. Then, as per the routine, she will travel back to the cathedral to present her findings, engage in conversation with Bishop Ivan, and thereafter, set off on her patrol of the city-state, continuing to tackle the countless issues tormenting the city and pursuing the investigations you had to relinquish. Nothing will be overlooked. On hearing these revelations, Agatha's usually composed demeanor turned absolutely glacial. She leveled an intense, piercing stare at the blonde man standing in front of her. You even concocted a double of the gatekeeper. Is that really so unthinkable? The blonde man's smile gradually faded, meeting Agatha's fiery gaze with a hint of scorn. True, she lacks your unique abilities, but other than that, she's a near-perfect copy, surpassing any previous imitation in every respect. Would you like to know how flawless she is? She isn't even aware of her own falseness. Agatha's demeanor morphed into icy resolve, her knuckles bleaching as she gripped her staff with an ironclad hold. A counterfeit won't deceive the cathedral. There are countless perceptive eyes vigilantly watching there. Countless perceptive eyes, yet all of them human nonetheless. You might be overestimating your comrades, the blonde man countered Agatha's chilly glare, his tone unruffled and composed. And regarding counterfeits, do you genuinely believe there exists a substantial difference between you, your comrades, and the double you're referring to? His laughter reverberated through the room once again, slowly raising his hands as if a holy sermonizer revealing the obscured truths of the universe. Miss Gatekeeper, there never were any counterfeits to start with, or perhaps, we are all counterfeits. That's the unadorned truth. As the mysterious island gradually came into focus, its hazy shroud of mist and dimly lit silhouettes began to coalesce into more tangible shapes that Lawrence could discern. Standing at the front edge of the majestic ship, aptly named the White Oak, he grasped the railing firmly. His grip tightened around the metal bars so intensely that his knuckles turned an eerie shade of white, a testament to the physical manifestation of his deep-seated apprehension. The entire scenario would have been enough to rattle the nerves of any person, not least a seasoned maritime veteran like Lawrence, who had spent the lion's share of his existence traversing the infinite expanses of the boundless sea. His mind was bombarded with a multitude of questions. What secrets did the island hold? What enigmatic creatures lurked within the misty shadows? Why did the island seem to form around the White Oak as if it were a sentient being? More importantly, what type of inexplicable and alien domain was this region that was deeply immersed in such baffling occurrences? In an attempt to still his thoughts, Lawrence inhaled deeply, allowing the icy air to fill his lungs. Its frosty bite served as a brief reprieve for his racing thoughts. He tried to set aside the more disconcerting anomalies, like the spectral image of Martha that kept appearing before him and the unsettling realization that others aboard the ship were also able to see this ghostly apparition. It became evident to him that these troubling thoughts were clear indications of his mental state starting to deteriorate. If he allowed these hallucinations to persist, Martha could potentially transition from a mere illusion into a considerably more palpable and disturbing entity. He had depleted his stock of elixirs, and even if he had any left, it was clear that they had lost their potency. In spite of the disquieting circumstances, the ship's steam core worked flawlessly, steadily driving the White Oak towards the diminutive yet captivating island with its intricately shaped coastline. Yet, no one seemed to notice the conditions at the ship's rear. Every gaze and thought aboard the vessel were entirely fixated on the looming, peculiar island. The edges of the island were harsh, decorated with jagged rocks that made docking impossible. The experienced helmsman did not attempt a reckless approach. Instead, he skillfully navigated the White Oak to begin a cautious perimeter voyage around the island. As they made about a third of the way around, the ever-watchful lookout stationed high in the ship's crow's nest made a surprising observation. "We have a port in sight." The sailor's shout echoed from the tower, indicating the first sign of safe harbor on this mysterious island. Just a short while later, Lawrence caught sight of a humble docking structure emerging from the fog. The details of the buildings nestled further into the dock were obscured by the stubborn fog, their forms frustratingly elusive. However, the section of the dock extending into the sea was vividly visible. It was well maintained and free from any evident harm or degradation. The presence of a fully operational dock meant that the White Oak could dock entirely, negating the need to deploy the smaller, more vulnerable boats for landing. This would significantly increase the safety of the exploratory party that would be setting foot on the island. Apart from providing a suitable location for replenishing supplies and ensuring a swift escape route if necessary, the ship's compact onboard artillery could also serve as a protective cover for the crew during their onshore exploration. Lawrence proceeded towards the helm of the ship, calling out instructions to cautiously steer the White Oak towards the seemingly deserted dock. Without the customary dockside personnel to aid them, the docking procedure was a drawn-out and painstaking process, but they managed to execute it seamlessly, avoiding any mishaps. As he directed his attention towards the dock on the other side, the island seemed to be swathed in an even denser shroud of fog than before. Even the structures closest to the dock were challenging to make out, their details smeared into obscurity by the heavy, foggy atmosphere. It could have been a figment of his imagination, but Lawrence had a feeling that the fog smothering this island was more concentrated than any he had previously encountered. "There's no trace of life anywhere," his first mate reported, coming up to Lawrence while casting a suspicious glance at the hidden island. "But I can discern faint glimmers of light. They appear to be originating from the buildings around the harbor." "And what about our radio communication? Ever since we approached this island, the constant radio signal from Frost that we've been relying on has ceased," the first mate confessed, shaking his head in a resigned manner, "and our attempts at communication via light signals have also failed to garner any response." After pondering over his options briefly, Lawrence made up his mind. "Choose 12 sailors, those who are vigilant and sharp-witted. Equip them with arms, and they will accompany me to explore the island." "You're planning on exploring the island personally?" The first mate seemed surprised. "This island, it's exceptionally bizarre. There's an inherent risk if you..." "Risk?" Lawrence cut him off with a dismissive shake of his head. "There's probably an equal amount of risk just staying aboard the ship. The oddity doesn't only lie with the island but with this entire maritime region. We're entrapped in a vast anomaly, and danger is present at every turn within its radius. At the very least, surveying the island might provide us with some valuable knowledge." The first mate seemed poised to voice his objections, but ultimately, he had to acknowledge the validity of the captain's decision. After all, Lawrence's wisdom, accrued experience, and sound judgment were undeniable. "Very well. I'll assemble the team," he conceded. In due course, the first mate returned with 12 carefully selected sailors, each a hardened mariner, exhibiting unwavering determination and steadfast loyalty. A team of 13 stalwart individuals, including the first mate himself, stood ready to accompany Lawrence onto the mysterious island. Meanwhile, the interim management of the White Oak fell into the capable hands of the second mate. A rope ladder was unfurled down to the pier, and Lawrence, accompanied by his small, resolute team of explorers, disembarked onto the peculiar island shrouded in thick fog. The feel of solid ground under their feet somewhat alleviated the explorers' unease. Standing solidly on the dock, Lawrence stamped his foot against the ground, muttering to himself in a hushed tone, "At least this concrete platform is real." "The lights originating from that direction," the first mate announced, clutching a high-caliber rifle as he peered into the dim distance. "Even from here, we can discern it, although there's no sign of any human activity. Don't wander off from the group, avoid touching anything unfamiliar, and if someone or something calls your name, don't respond until you've determined its origin and made sure all team members are accounted for," Lawrence began, issuing his directives with firm authority. "If anything out of the ordinary emerges from the fog, immediately alert the group. Do not take it upon yourself to shoot at it or investigate on your own. He paused for a moment, sweeping his gaze over the assembled group, 12 seasoned sailors, his dependable first mate, and himself. Lastly, remember this, there are precisely 14 of us. When we eventually return to the ship, we may have fewer members, but under no circumstances should we have more. Aye, Captain. The sailors responded in unison, affirming their understanding. With a nod, Lawrence led the team into the thick, swirling fog. As they navigated the span of the pier, they found themselves in a large, open area that seemed to be a makeshift gathering point for cargo. Traces of stacking machinery and small cranes were still present, but beyond these mechanical vestiges, there were no other signs of human occupation. This place doesn't look like it has been abandoned for long, the first mate muttered, absorbing their surroundings. It feels as if it was a bustling dock just a few days ago. Opting for silence, Lawrence carefully surveyed the nearby port facilities with a discerning eye. Suddenly, a plaque affixed to a nearby building caught his attention. Dagger Island. The first mate questioned, advancing to examine the inscription on the plaque, a glint of astonishment flashing in his eyes. I've come across references to this place. It's a minor island situated near Frost, reputed for its rich deposits of metal ores. However, I was under the impression that it had been repurposed into a military facility a few years back. Can this actually be Dagger Island? We must cast a suspicious eye on everything in this place. We even moored briefly at a location eerily resembling Frost. Earlier, Lawrence responded, shaking his head in doubt. Let's press on. The origin of that lingering light could be the port office. It might hold some clarity to our situation. Leaving behind the cargo assembly area, the exploration team ventured up a gentle incline, their path faintly illuminated by the soft light filtering through the fog. Every member of the group was on high alert, their senses acutely tuned to the strange movement within the fog. A barely perceptible breeze capriciously wound across the island, stirring the gray fog into a languid drift. Eerie shapes barely visible in the distance seemed to swell in rhythm with the whiteness, appearing like sentient beings swaying gently in the mist. Amid the dim shroud, the glow steadily grew more prominent, drawing ever closer within everyone's field of view. Suddenly, the first mate leading the group came to a sudden standstill. What in the world is this? Stooping down, he furrowed his brows as he studied a strange substance found off the side of their path. With a revolver in one hand and a lantern held high in the other, Lawrence joined his first mate and directed his gaze towards the unusual sight. Before them lay a mound of a gray-black substance, clearly dehydrated based on the cracks radiating from its edges yet still showing signs of its final moments of vitality. It was as if this heap of mud had been bubbling with life one moment, then had all of its moisture abruptly sapped the next. Mud. Lawrence furrowed his brow, wisely choosing not to touch the peculiar heap. Why would there be mud here? I believe I spotted some similar black mud back on the dock, a sailor chimed in tentatively, but that stuff was strewn with debris. I simply dismissed it as trash. Lawrence nodded in acknowledgement, only for another sailor to suddenly declare, there's another pile of this stuff over here too. Following the direction of the shout, Lawrence identified another heap of the strange black mud slightly off the road. Could it be that this mysterious substance was dispersed all across the island? A creeping sense of apprehension started to permeate their collective consciousness, yet none among them could ascertain the nature of this mysterious mud. Lawrence, ever vigilant, rallied his team and instructed everyone to steer clear of the strange substance. With a shared sense of disquiet, they continued their march further into the encompassing fog. After traversing a certain distance, they arrived at the crest of the slope. Just as Lawrence had anticipated, the location turned out to be the site of the port office. A modest structure comprised of concrete and steel loomed before them, a weak, yellow light bleeding out from the windows. However, no discernible sounds originated from within the building with its front door open. Lawrence edged towards the entrance, keenly attuning his ears for any sounds within before gearing himself to push it open. But abruptly, he froze in his tracks. Hastily etched into the wall adjacent to the door, presumably with a dagger, was a sentence that gave him a jolt: humans only have two eyes.